Marian Holcomb made her living talking about ghosts precisely because it spared her from having to talk about herself. On her midnight magnolia walking tours, she recited Savannah's favorite tragedies: yellow fever quarantines, accidental burials, jealous duels, like a stage actress hidden behind a velvet curtain. Guests saw only the neat silhouette of a small, brown-haired woman swinging a brass lantern at the front of the group, her voice steady, her eyes averted. When the evening script ended at the weather-worn gates of the Palmetto House Inn, she bowed, accepted tips folded like origami so she would not have to meet anyone's gaze, then disappeared into the cypress-scented dark. The first Thursday in August began no differently, save for the heat that shimmered above the cobblestones like liquid glass. Marian shepherded 24 tourists from Colonial Park Cemetery to Madison Square, while monumental clouds bruised the sky purple. The air smelled metallic, like a struck match. She hurried the pace, worried about thunder, but more worried about improvisation. The Palmetto House, with its iron balconies and 200 years of gossip, was her finale. Tonight she trimmed all but the essential details so her lecture could finish before the heavens split open. A lone guest booked at the inn, a music professor named Elise Burdett, lingered when the others scattered for ride-shares. Elise was taller than Marian and wore a novelty poncho patterned with saxophones. "Your stories were beautiful," she said, her accent drifting between Charleston vowels. "Would you walk me to the lobby? First time in Savannah, I'm hopeless with directions." Marian hesitated. Conversation without a script felt like a cello missing strings. Still, thunder rumbled a warning. She led Elise under the portico and into the foyer's lantern light. The innkeeper, Mr. Dandridge, emerged from his desk with a flash of silver hair and a cat-like smile. Keys exchanged hands, papers slid across polished wood, and Elise vanished upstairs humming a tune that rose and fell like a question. A sheet of lightning cracked. Rain slammed the roof like tidal surf. Marian ducked onto the veranda to calculate the safest sprint home. Instead, she felt the hairs along her arms quiver. The inn behind her inhaled. She could swear it did, and exhaled a bloom of cold that wrapped her spine. Somewhere inside, a door banged 3 deliberate times. Marian tipped her lantern toward the sound. Every tour guide had heard uncanny noises at Palmetto House. Clattering teacups, whispered prayers, a child's giggle in rooms where no children lodged. But this knock felt intentional, even urgent. She waited, counting the thunder's heartbeat. Nothing followed. Concluding that curiosity was a currency she could not afford, she turned, hitched her bag higher, and hurried through the downpour. She woke the next morning to 14 missed calls. Her employer, the Magnolia Tour Office, delivered the news first. The inn's only guest had vanished sometime between the previous night's storm and sunrise. The police wanted to re-interview anyone who might have spoken with Elise, but Marian returned to Palmetto House immediately. Interview rooms, like performance stages, made Marian nauseous. She stood on the veranda again by 10:30, dripping despite a merciless Georgia sun. Detective Valenzuela asked perfunctory questions. Was Elise depressed? Intoxicated? Romantic about danger? Did Marian notice staircases that groaned or locks that stuck? Then waved her away. The law labelled Elise a missing person and vaccinated itself against further speculation, but the house would not release Marian so easily. That afternoon she inventoried her tour props in the carriage house behind the inn. The narrow shed smelled of peach wine and mould. While she polished her brass lantern, the air changed, softened like a double exposure of past and present sliding into focus. A single word materialized on the lantern glass, written as if by a fingertip dragged through dust. "Stay." Marian yelped, nearly dropping the heirloom. No footsteps retreated. No prankster giggled. She wiped the pane clean, locked the shed and crossed the courtyard toward the lobby, unsure whether to tell anyone. Then came a second message. In the foyer, a framed map of old Savannah hung slightly off-center. Behind its glass, tiny white dots aligned into dashes and pauses. Morse code. danger in the walls. The code electrified something dormant in Marion. The part of her that learnt semaphore for a childhood Girl Scout badge. The part that loved puzzles because they were conversations one could have alone. She fetched her phone, snapped photos of both messages, and marched to the front desk, where Mr. Dandridge catalogued cancellations. When she showed him the lantern, he frowned, but said the obvious. Dusty surfaces, collect random streaks. As for the Morse map, it's antique, he replied, adjusting the frame so the dots misaligned. Old ink patterns shift in humidity, nothing supernatural about thermodynamics. Marion walked out before he finished. Thermodynamics did not, in her experience, study grammar. That night she returned with a notebook and a thermos of black coffee. She told herself she was looking for Elise, not consorting with phantoms, but self-deception tasted thin as rice paper. If a ghost spoke to her, she would answer. By midnight, the inn slept. Only ceiling fans muttered. Marion paced the second-floor corridor, touching wallpaper that peeled like scabbed lace. For a moment she feared she'd imagined everything, yet when the grandfather clock in the library chimed 1, the house answered. 3 sharp knocks, exactly like the ones after the storm, reverberated through the hall. She followed them to room 7, Elise's suite. Police tape looped the knob. Beneath it, a boarding axe from some forgotten renovation propped the door shut. Another code awaited her in the dust on the floorboards. ... Please go. Marion knelt. I can't, she whispered, aware of her absurdity and not caring. Tell me what happened to Elise. She traced letters into the opposite patch of dust. WHOAREYOU. The boarding axe trembled. A breath of air hissed under the door, scattering her question. Then a new sentence wrote itself along the skirting board. First, I saved her. Now save me. The semantics puzzled Marion, but she felt certain of 2 things. The spirit, who apparently could not speak aloud, had intervened during last night's storm, and something still impelled them both. Help me understand, she said, leaning so close her lips skimmed the wood. The only response was a pressure behind her eyes like unshed tears. She retreated, shaken yet exhilarated. For the first time since childhood she felt wanted, not for a rehearsed tale but for her particular mind. The mute spirit had chosen her. That obligation, exquisite and terrifying, anchored her steps back down the staircase. Savannah's historical archives kept longer hours than decent society expected. The reference librarian was a nocturnal creature who reshelled Civil War diaries at 2 a.m. Marion bribed him with coffee and searched property deeds for Palmetto House. The structure dated to 1801, when it served as a physician's residence. Ownership passed through widows, hotel magnates, a riverboat gambler who hanged himself in the linen closet, and finally Silas Dandridge, grandfather of the present innkeeper. In a brittle newspaper clipping from 1893, she found oxygen for her intuition. Hurricane claims silent maid. The article described Lillian Clark, a chambermaid, born without the gift of speech, who roused boarders during a catastrophic storm by pounding on every door. She saved 13 lives before floodwater swept her into the basement coal chute, where she drowned. Recovery teams located her body wedged behind a brick false wall, meant for smuggling liquor. The article ended, macabre and casual. The wall remains unbreached in her honor. Marion shivered. Danger in the walls. The spirit's message was literal. But why imperil Elise? Or had Lillian protected the guest from something even worse? Marion returned to the inn at dawn, eager to inspect the basement. Mr. Dandridge caught her descending the servants' stairs and barked, "Only maintenance beyond this point." Marion improvised a lie about cataloguing atmospheric details for her tour. He sniffed at the word atmospheric as though it reeked, but allowed her 5 minutes, so long as she touched nothing. The basement smelled of mineral water and thyme. Walls of Savannah, grey brick, sweated under bare bulbs. Marion counted 8 paces from the chute described in the article before a draught cooled her ankles. A vertical fissure in the mortar crossed half the wall like a surgical scar. She pressed her ear against it and heard wind or breath. She could not be certain. Someone called her name. Mr. Dandridge impatient upstairs, and she left, vowing to return with tools. By evening, Detective Valenzuela announced that phone records placed Elise's cell inside the inn, silent but active. Search warrants would arrive tomorrow. That left Marian one night to parley with the dead unfettered by police tape. She texted her assistant to cancel the ghost walk, packed a crowbar, and smuggled herself past the concierge once moonlight paled the tiles. In the basement, thunder rumbled again, as if the previous storm had rewound to replay. Rainwater seeped through the coal chute, drumming a dirge. Marian wedged the crowbar into the mortar crack and leaned her weight. Brick groaned like an old dog woken from sleep. She feared the noise would summon staff, yet only silence replied. 3 bricks dislodged, then 4. Behind them opened a cavity the size of a linen cupboard, pitch black and cold. She raised her lantern. A pair of eyes reflected amber. Marian almost screamed before noticing their glassy stillness. A porcelain doll in a muslin dress, water-damaged yet whole. Beside it lay a rusted tin box. No human remains, no skeletal hand reaching for release. When she prized the box lid, she found a woman's locket, a cameo brooch, and a stack of letters bound with red ribbon. She tucked everything into her satchel, but left the doll. Some boundaries mattered even to a ghost. Back in the library, she read the letters. Lillian Clark had penned them in meticulous script, despite her muteness, proof she possessed language, only not its spoken form. Each letter addressed Dearest J. Half confessed longing. Half chronicled the physician's clandestine experiments upstairs. He used patients' morphine addictions to extort valuables, then stored them in the secret wall. Lillian feared discovery, but feared his patients suffering more. Final letter ended with a plan. Tonight the tide rises. I will steal the key and set them free. Something in the margins glowed faintly. Marian angled her lantern. Moisture revealed invisible ink forming a map of the basement. A second cavity larger opened behind the boiler. Heart-tripping, Marian raced the length of the corridor. Steam scalded her arms, but she found the indicated spot, mortar fresher by decades, perhaps repaired after the hurricane. She hammered with the crowbar until brick crumbled. A gap yawned, lantern light fanned across a cramped room. And Elise Burdett, gagged but alive, wrists bound to a radiator pipe. Elise's eyes widened with shock, then grateful disbelief. Marian sliced the ropes with a utility knife. The gag, wet with condensation, peeled away like seaweed. Elise coughed, unable to form words. Marian steadied her. They huddled on the damp floor, while thunder barged overhead. When Elise could whisper, she said, "He locked me in after I overheard him." "Who?" "Dandridge. He runs a jewel theft racket. I saw him stash a necklace inside the wall in the lobby. He panicked when he thought I'd gone to the police." She shuddered. "He knows these walls better than breathing." Marian squeezed Elise's shoulder. "Someone else knows them too." A footstep scraped behind them. Dandridge's silhouette blocked the corridor, flashlight slicing shadows. "God forgive nosy women," he muttered, less threat than theology. He raised a pistol. Lightning flashed. A concussive boom followed, yet no thunder. The flashlight flew from his grip as if smacked by invisible arms. The pistol discharged harmlessly into the ceiling. Bricks rattled. One struck Dandridge's temple, and he crumpled unconscious. Elise gaped. Marianne bowed her head as if thanking an orchestra conductor. "Lillian Clark," she murmured. A wind knotted her hair, though no basement window stood open. Then, on the concrete floor between them, a final message formed from grains of coal dust. "Tell them I spoke." Police sirens chorused minutes later, summoned by Elise's stolen phone, which Marian activated from her satchel. Valenzuela found 2 women bruised but articulate, a man in handcuffs moaning about vengeful walls, and enough stolen heirlooms to inventory a small museum. Marian gave her statement, while consciously excluding one participant. Lillian's letters, however, she handed over. certain the mute maid would not mind if truth travelled under mortal names. News outlets devoured the story. Tourist recused from secret room. Innkeeper arrested. They mentioned a local historian named Marian Holcomb, whose research led to the discovery. The Magnolia tour office promoted her to program director overnight, insisting she craft an all-new walk themed around unsung heroines. For once, public attention did not feel like acid on skin. She accepted, stipulating that the inaugural tour would culminate at Lillian Clark's restored memorial. Restoration crews dismantled the false walls. The cavity where Elise had nearly died became a small exhibit featuring Lillian's letters and cameo brooch. Beneath glass, a placard displayed excerpts, including the invisible ink sentence revealed by steam. "I have no voice, so I write thunder." Tourists read and cried and purchased replicas in the gift shop. Marian visited after hours, when the rope barrier unhooked easily and the basement quieted. She stood before the exhibit speaking softly. "They know you saved lives," she said one evening as autumn cooled the bricks. "We know you spoke?" The lantern hanging above flickered 3 times. "Yes, yes, yes." Marian smiled. Conversation, she learned, could transcend both shyness and death. It only required a willing listener. Weeks later, during the first unsilent Savannah tour, Marian paused outside Palmetto House, beneath moss-laden oaks. Crowds waited for a rehearsed anecdote. Instead, they heard her own voice, unrehearsed, tremble, then steady. She told of a chambermaid who beat upon doors she couldn't shout through, of a modern traveler rescued by knuckles that still bruised wood a century after flesh dissolved, of walls once complicit now speaking truth. Rain started, light as tea mist. Marianne lifted her lantern. Thunder rolled gently, like applause cushioned by distance, and somewhere in that hush, on a dart of cool air that braided moonlight and magnolia, floated more stashes nobody else seemed to notice. Bravegirl. Marian lowered the lantern to her chest, pulse echoing its glow. She did not reply aloud. She only placed her free hand against the nearest wall, and in the silent exchange that followed, 2 introverts, one living, one long dead, both fluent in quiet spoke, more eloquently than any guidebook ever could.